Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you all for coming today. We're really glad to see everybody. This is our first of our regular quarterly Cool Davis Coalition meetings for the year. The next meetings are in May, August, and November. And we don't have any scheduled topics for those next meetings, so we're looking for ideas. So anyone is welcome to submit those and also get involved in planning those activities if you're interested. We're going to start today. I think we have a small enough group that we could just do really quick, your name, your title, just go around and do that. And if any of you have any special announcements from a working group or from if you're a partner of Cool Davis, please share those things. After we get done with that segment, we will move on to Michael McCormick, who will be giving a presentation on what's happening with the Biden administration and their climate initiatives.
Chris, do we want to do the land acknowledgement before introductions?
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
If you would start that for us, that would be great.
Okay, so I am proud and honored to be issuing, I believe, the first land acknowledgement for Cool Davis. We plan to do this going forward. We are borrowing from the UC Davis land acknowledgement that was made available to the university community. And I think it's important context to say that UC Davis consulted with and had this statement approved by the 3 Patwin tribes. So, and the other context is that this statement is intended to be delivered without edits, should I say. So this is the statement itself that was approved. And if I pronounce some of the tribal names wrong, it's because I'm learning. So we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Kachil Dehe Band of Wintoon Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal Dehe Wintoon Nation, and Yocha Dehe Wintoon Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. That's it.
Thanks.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I'm Chris Granger. I'm the executive director with Cool Davis. Christine?
Oh, I'm Christine Shoemaker. I'm the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Valley Clean Energy, and here along with Mitch for the last item on the agenda.
Jim?
I'm Jim Kramer with Yolanda Group of Sierra Club and the United Methodist Church in Davis, and also a member of the Yellow Interfaith Alliance for Climate Justice.
Lynn?
I'm Lynn Nittler, a community member and also a founder and member of Cool Davis and leader of the Yellow Interfaith Alliance for Climate Justice, which is a working group of Cool Davis.
Thanks, Lynn. Richard?
I'm Richard Bode. I'm the representative from the Davis Electric Vehicle Association. And I guess I've been nominated by my group because I can't talk anyone else to show up with us.
But Scott?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I am Scott Stewart. I represent both the YOLO Climate Emergency Coalition and also the Climate Crisis Committee of Unitarian Universalists.
Alan.
Hi, Alan Hirsch, member of Davis Futures Forum and a member of YOLO Mobility and also the part-time Lorax.
Joe.
Hi, Joe Bolte, Davis resident and member of BTSSC and YOLO Mobility with Alan and a couple other folks. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Carrie.
Hi, everyone. Carrie Lux with City of Davis. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator in the Community Development Department and Project Manager for the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan 2020 update, as well as the staff liaison to both the Natural Resources Commission and to Cool Davis. So glad to be here today. Thanks.
Michael.
Hey everybody, Michael McCormick with Cool Davis on the Cool Davis board.
Mitch.
Mitch Sears, today interim general manager of Valley Clean Energy, but also the sustainability manager for the City of Davis.
Let's see, Rick and Wendy.
Rick Edwards here. I'm on the advisory board for a group called Sustainable Wenatchee, which is the nascent Cool Davis of the Wenatchee Valley. My connection to Davis, my sister lives in Davis, so.
Welcome.
Rick, where is the Wenatchee Valley?
Central Washington, 150 miles due east of Seattle.
Okay, well, you get the farthest away participant award. Welcome.
All right. Thank you.
Coolest member of Cool Davis today.
Let's see, who's left here? Robin.
Unmute yourself, Robin.
Resident of the Davis Manor neighborhood and member of the Davis Manor Neighborhood Creative Action Team and board member of Davis Media Access.
Okay.
All right.
And Johan?
And Johan.
I'm Johan Waring. I'm a retired environmental engineer. I take every now and then some pictures for Cool Davis. And today I would like to use the opportunity to tell you that 3 of 5 ideas of my best friends and me have been accepted at a sustainability site in the Netherlands, dealing with ideas.
I'm sorry, can you save that for the ending time when we have a discussion or we have some open time?
No problem.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll go last. Leslie Krenna, Communications Manager for Cool Davis and member of Waterwise Davis, which is a working group of Cool Davis. Great.
Well, thank you, everyone. So we'll continue just with our basic business meeting. I have, there's a few representatives of some of our working groups. And so if both our DIVA group and the Interfaith Alliance representatives could share a little bit about the projects they're working on right now, that would be terrific. And then if we have any other partners, reps who would like to share anything, for instance, Robin, if you have any news from DMA, also if there are any neighborhood news that anyone would like to share, that would be great. So Lynn?
Sure. I don't know if people already know, but just in case some of you don't, the YOLO Interfaith Alliance for Climate Justice, with much help from Cool Davis, has organized a series of climate speakers. The first of which is, what day is this? Wednesday, less than a week from tonight. It's next Tuesday night. And so our first speaker is, we're starting with a big bang, Kim Stanley Robinson, speaking on his most recent book, a Cli-Fi book, The Ministry for the Future. And that one should be quite wonderful. In fact, I was going to tell you that he's my neighbor. So speaking to him, he told me that someone wanted to Zoom with him. He didn't really know who, and it turned out to be Cristiana Figueres, who led the Paris climate talks and continues to lead the climate program for the world, and Zoomed in because she was so excited about his book. So that should give it a stamp of approval, I think. That's pretty big. And we also have 3 more speakers coming after that, roughly 1 each month. One of them, they're all university professors, and one is on climate change and capitalism, another on fire trends in California. And the last is on the green moo, M-O-O as in cows, deal. So all interesting. A little bit about each in the letter, in the article posted at Cool Davis Now that features Kim Stanley Robinson. And then we'll bring more information about each of them as they come along. So hope you can join us.
Thanks, Lynn.
And I just posted in the chat the link to the blog post where you can register for that exciting event.
So Richard, do you have any news from DEVA for us?
So maybe a couple quick things. We had our meeting, was it last week? I think it was last week. And we continue to do our every other month meetings on EVs, in which we try and encourage EV curious people to learn more about EVs and adopt EV transportation. Actually spend some time just with the more engineering side too, all the new happenings with cars and trucks. Trucks is the big highlight coming out in 2021. And then we continue to talk internally about how do we get more information out outside these meetings, in which I'm talking to Chris and some other DEVA people about. So we may end up having some informal webcasts for the EV curious, and we hope to expand those here in the near future. And I would tell you the other thing we're dealing with, Chris knows about, is trying to decide whether to respond publicly to a study that came out just this last week that basically was saying that it looks like people are buying EVs, but they don't drive them as much as fossil fuel cars. So, you know, it looks like, which I didn't realize, it's getting to be a big story, because those people actually who don't like basically, you know, sustainable energy, EVs, that kind of crowd are just tooting this thing up. But when we've looked at it, we realized that, you know, they used the data they had, but it's basically from about 5, 6 years ago, about a 3 or 4 year period when, you know, the greatest mileage on these cars was about basically 84 miles. So I think our message is going to be, hey, there's a new EV world right now. So anyway, that's about it for us.
Thanks, Richard. So was there anyone else who wanted to share some information before we go to Michael?
Yes, this is Alan Hirsch. There's a new draft tree ordinance out that's important in terms of sustainability. For active transportation, we need shade and protecting street trees. So that's being worked through the city process.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you all. It's always good to see everyone. We are now going to kind of move on in our agenda. So Michael McCormick has joined us to give a presentation on what's happening with the Biden administration. Michael is the current board president with Cool Davis. He recently formed his own new company called Fairlawn Strategies, doing lots of interesting work in the climate realm. I'm sure he'd love to talk with many of you offline about that work. But Michael brings a wealth of experience, both in his role serving in the Brown administration and the Office of Planning and Research, and also in the time he spent in the Obama administration working on climate policy there. So he's got lots of connections to what's going on in Washington right now, and really looking forward to hearing his presentation. Michael, did you have slides to share, or you just want to?
I don't have slides to share. That would mislead people to think that everything is all formed up. Yeah, thank you, Chris. And before I jump into this, so I don't forget, I do want to mention that the coalition has 2 board spots for the Cool Davis Board of Directors. They have not been filled for a while now. So one of the things we'd like to do is ask that the coalition look internally to identify some folks that can represent coalition on the board as we continue to build the board of directors for our next 10 years of work, knowing that we've had 10 years of great work so far, 10 years to go to get to 20. And then, hopefully all climate issues will be resolved by then. It's getting to be about 5 o'clock, so I'm going to throw some humor in here and there. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so just a little background on why Chris asked me to talk today. As she mentioned a little bit of my background, I wear a couple different hats right now. One of them is with Farallon Strategies, which is my firm, and I'm working with a couple of nonprofit and philanthropic clients that are staying very close to the administration, what they're doing to try to leverage and match philanthropic dollars and initiatives with what the federal government is going to be doing on climate. So that's a really nice connection point to really lift up some of the work that the federal agencies want to do, but without necessarily the funding to do it in the way that allows flexibility and freedom like philanthropic dollars do. So there's some creativity funding stacks happening to make some things happen in a less structured way than you would typically expect from just federal budgets. Talk about that in a second. The other piece is I'm working as a special advisor to the Local Government Commission. And one of the projects we have there is a California endowment funded grant to look at various projects and initiatives across the state and to develop a list of priority projects that result in a just and resilient recovery. So we're working with community-based organizations, local, regional governments, and other nonprofits to develop a list of resources and list of projects that state agencies, the federal agencies, and others that are looking to fund things that can be scaled quickly, that they can tap into, knowing they've been vetted by an outside resource. So that and some of just the reconnects that I've been doing with some of the folks that have rejoined the federal interagency and the federal executive office, a brief hiatus on climate leadership for the past 4 years. There's a lot of rebuilding to do right now. And I think as I've been reconnecting with old colleagues that have moved over to DC or working remotely, many of them, I think there's a recognition that there's a massive loss in capacity to do climate work inside the federal government right now because of what happened to federal agencies over the last 4 years. Unfilled positions, closed programs, unfunded programs, office moves that resulted in mass changes in physical location and job titles. So there's a lot of disruptive energy that's occurred over the past 4 years that first needs to be repaired. And so I think the first thing that I would mention is on the schedule. So you notice in the first 10 days, and many of you have been following this news very closely. So the first 10 days was really focused on resetting status quo. How do we get back to some sort of normalcy so we can plan from that normalcy and move forward from that? There were 32 executive orders, and that's what that was intended to do, is reestablish a norm so that the first 100 days of his administration, of the Biden administration, could be focused on taking that 10 days of direction and building it out into a more significant set of initiatives, assigning people in the interagency to that. I think it was one of the first administrations that has had transition team members carrying over for a very long period of time. Normally a transition team will go in and they'll spend a month or two within an agency, normally the month of December. And by the time appointees start arriving, they back out in January. We're seeing the transition team members in place still, and there's several folks that I've been talking with that are going to continue into March. Because of the lack of capacity and lack of connection to what was previously set forward in the climate space, these folks are bringing in critical institutional knowledge about how to reset a status quo around climate in the interagency. So that's for first 100 days is important because it's basically setting the path for the rest of the administration, at least the first 4 years of the administration, because it's getting the interagency set up to own certain things. So after this 100 days, that's when the real program development starts. Simultaneous to that, we have discussions on stimulus. We have a few $100 billion to go out to state and local assistance through the stimulus package. And we have a budget process that's occurring concurrently. So we have a lot of activities happening right now. And again, very little capacity in the interagency to actually do the work. And the Office of Management and Budget, which is in the Executive Office of the President, is typically the one that pulls together the president's budget and puts it forward to Congress. They also were completely decimated from a capacity standpoint. So what I think Biden and Harris did, which was really smart to try to reset where we were, is they brought in a bunch of the old, trusted, knowledgeable institutional transformation folks or institutional knowledge folks from the Obama administration and brought them back in to basically reset some normalcy. So then we think about what does the team look like? And there's a new office in the White House, and this is the Office of Climate Change. And Gina McCarthy is running that, which is wonderful. More importantly, the staff that are supporting Gina are people that I know are deeply rooted in climate advocacy and equity and environmental justice. In particular, Ali Zaidi, who I had the pleasure of working with when I was in the White House Council on Environmental Quality. He was at the Office of Management and Budget. And during the time of, and I think you may know, towards the end of the Obama administration was when really climate became something that he was pushing hard. He was the person that was calling cabinet secretaries to get climate initiatives funded creatively through interagency crosscuts, basically begging, borrowing, stealing from the interagency to fund climate programs that Congress wouldn't fund. So he has come forward with really creative ideas on how to fund projects when they weren't otherwise fundable through congressional action. And so through executive action, he's using those budget levers that the executive office has to push initiatives before the congressional budget is approved. And so that's really fun to watch because the folks that have been lobbying against climate work for so long have been really good at manipulating the budget to do things counter to robust climate action. And we have a team in the executive office now that is just as savvy about how to use budget mechanisms to push money around in a way that reorients priorities, realigns around climate as a priority and sustainability as a priority. Speaking to that, we looked to Pete Buttigieg, who he ran on a platform that climate was very important, a critical part of what many of these early executive orders showed was a commitment to some of Pete Buttigieg's platform. And one of the things I'm really excited about with him being the Secretary of the Department of Transportation is that he has committed to fully fund high-speed rail. He's a rail guy, just like Biden is. Biden has ridden Amtrak for so many years. I love rail, so I'm a rail aficionado also. And he's also one of these folks that is very savvy about budgeting and creative ways to align priorities through governance. So we've got a lot of folks in the interagency and in the executive office now that have deep experience working on climate. It's the most diverse cabinet ever. It is the second and third round appointees are really diverse. And I admit earlier that the capacity of the interagency has been eviscerated over the past 4 years. Well, that's terrible for right now. But what that means is that there's 25,000 vacancies that need to be filled by people. So over the next couple of years, as the Biden administration fills all of these vacancies in the interagency, that means he gets to choose, and his team gets to choose the background of those folks, what they're passionate about, what does it mean to have a criteria to hire people into those positions. And he has about 3,000 senior appointees that he needs to get through the process in the next couple of months. And then there's 25,000 other appointees, and the numbers are all over the place. That's one number that I chose, but depending on how you look at it, it could be less than that. It could be a lot more than that. But this is a huge opportunity to transform how the interagency works together and how they look at climate. And from the conversations I've had, my old colleagues that have gone back, the White House Council on Environmental Quality, the Global Change Research Program, Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Domestic Policy Council that's being run by Susan Rice, John Kerry, who, I went to the United Nations conferences with him and his team when he was Secretary of the State. And it was wonderful to see the respect and the trust that people had in the work that he and his team were doing. And so we have all of these amazing, well-connected folks that understand budgets, they understand governance, and they have a passion about moving forward actively and aggressively on climate mitigation and adaptation. So I know that a lot of folks in the coalition actively are working really hard to make progress locally, regional, statewide on climate. And we've been doing this, I've been working on climate for 20 years. I can tell you that I am, as much as I struggle with the current dynamic of our climate, I'm also the most hopeful that I've been in my entire career on things moving forward actively and aggressively on climate. Unfortunately, it has to get to this point where it is literally a climate emergency for the actions to take place at the federal level. But we're here now, and strongly supporting and aggressively pushing for that strong action at the federal level from the outside is going to give those internal staff the cover they need to make tough decisions that are going to be pushed back on by many different actors, not just in Washington, D.C., but also in the interagency that may not be thinking that climate is as a larger priority as it is. So that being said, we should all not stop pushing, knowing that these fantastic people are in place, but instead be really helpful and push strategically to make sure that they're supported and have the cover they need to make the progress that they need to make. So that's I'm not going to throw around dollar amounts or specific program ideas, but I think what we can expect is that everything coming out of this administration is going to have climate as an important priority. It's going to have equity and environmental justice as an important priority. It's going to be embedded into programs, and it's going to be embedded into how things are deployed, how things are prioritized to traditionally marginalized community and disadvantaged communities, communities of color. And it's a wonderful shift in how our federal government prioritizes dollars from the squeaky wheel to the people that actually need it. So it's going to take a little time, but the stimulus is the first step to really aggressively make that shift. And we're seeing really good signs that that's happening the way so many people have been wanting it to happen. So happy to answer any questions if I know the answers.
Did anyone have any questions? Thanks, Michael. That was terrific.
Do.
Hey, Lynn. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm concerned about his appointment to agriculture. And that one person kind of stands out as someone who's not so much in keeping with all of the things you've been saying. But maybe you can tell a different story on that. Because soil sequestration is one of the big solution pieces. And I think the person you appointed is not in line with that. And so what can you tell us?
I unfortunately can't tell you much about Secretary. Are you talking about, you're not talking about Deb Haaland?
No.
as the
No, no, no,
Interior
no,
Secretary?
No, this, what's the official title for the
Oh,
secretary?
are you talking about USDA?
Yeah, and it's a really key, soil sequestration is a huge, huge piece of the solution. And I think he appointed someone who's wants to do everything the way we've been doing it, which will wash away all our soils and leave us quite stranded in that regard. And it's one of the biggest pieces of all.
Tom Vilsack.
And no one can understand why that appointment was out of sync with all the other appointments.
You know, there's an element to Biden that involves crossing the aisle, and USDA is one of these really tough nut to crack agencies that it's an old boys network, very traditional, a lot of vested interest stuck in the interagency and in the bureaucracy. And I don't know the specifics of it, but my understanding is that Vilsack is committed to bringing in the right people to make the change and for him to support them versus him doing the change himself. And that's I think, when I think about this current administration, the cabinet is really important, but the most important people are the second and third people down, because they're the ones that are working across the interagency. And the external affairs folks who used to take phone calls from the oil and gas industry are hopefully now going to be taking phone calls from the climate community. And so when we look at appointments for the external affairs assistant secretaries and deputy secretaries, those are going to be the folks really important, because they're the ones that pre-screen information up to the secretary. And they're the ones advising the secretary on actions. They're the ones actually working across the interagency, versus the secretaries themselves are, they're making major decisions, it's true, but they're taking direction from the president too. And if he's not responding to President Biden's direction, that's probably going to be a problem. But I am excited to see who he's going to appoint in those positions, because ultimately the appointments team in the White House has authority over those deputies and assistant secretaries. Vilsack obviously has a voice in it, but I think that the demographic and dynamic is going to change a bit in USDA versus where it has been. Just a gut feeling.
Okay, so I'll watch for that. Thank
Chris,
you, Michael.
Chris, I had a question.
So
this is Rick Edwards. I had a quick question for Michael.
We're encroaching in on the time for our next speaker. So I think what I'm going to suggest is you put your questions, both you and Joe, put your questions in the chat, and then we're going to have a Q&A time at the end, and we'll make sure that we cover those then, if that's okay with everybody.
That's great.
All right, fabulous. Thanks, Michael. And now we're gonna move on to our friends from Valley Clean Energy. They're going to tell us some of the new planning they've been doing for their long-range plans for programming and new initiatives on the part of Valley Clean Energy, who is our electricity provider for our community. And we are really glad that you both, Mitch Sears, who is the interim general manager, and Christine Shoemaker, who is the chair of the advisory committee to VCE, are both with us today to share their thoughts. So Mitch, you're going to share screen, is that correct?
Yeah, I'll share screen. Yep. And before I start though, I'd cede half my time to Michael. I mean, it's a very interesting report, Michael. I'm curious to follow up with you maybe at some point. Really fascinating. It's great to get an inside view of how things are looking from a bit broader perspective. And what Christine and I have to offer is, I think, the on the ground kind of application of some of the ideas and policies that Michael was talking about. Obviously, California has been sort of working away at a number of different elements around climate, and in our particular case, energy, for the past 4 years. But it's been a challenging time, even though we've been pretty well focused at the local level. But be happy to kind of take some of those types of questions as well. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got an overly long PowerPoint presentation, but hopefully we'll get through it, and it'll be relatively interesting to you. And Chris, I can share it as a slideshow, or I can do it this way. It's a little easier for me to navigate if people can see my screen. Probably a little easier to do it this way. So I'll go ahead and get started. So again, as a sort of a brief introduction, most of you know me. I've been with the City of Davis for close to 25 years now, serving in a number of different roles, currently as a sustainability manager, but I've been on loan to Valley Clean Energy for a period of time here as the organization went through an establishment phase, is now into operations and serving customers. And we'll go over some of the profile of the organization itself. But I did want to also introduce again Christine Shoemaker, who is the current chair of the Community Advisory Committee. And we've got a slide on those folks, but it's great to have Christine here this evening too to help answer some questions and describe to you a little bit about how the Community Advisory Committee, what their function is and how they interacted with our strategic plan that we're going to be talking a little bit about tonight. So just to kind of get started here, we'll talk about, give a little bit of an overview and introduction, which we're talking about now, provide a little context. Primarily, we're going to talk about the newly adopted 3-year strategic plan that the Valley Clean Energy Board adopted back in November. I think it does provide a pretty good overview of where the board of directors sees the organization heading over the next couple of years and into the period of time that Michael was just talking about as we face increasing challenges in the transition to a carbon-free economy and the things that go along with that. And of course, we're going to be covering the energy sector. And hopefully we'll leave enough time at the end for a good, robust round of questions and answers. So jumping in here, just some very basic, I think most of you know what a community choice aggregation program is, but it was created, came out of legislation here in California, AB 117 back in 2002. And it does allow cities and counties to form these public CCA agencies. They do partner with the investor-owned utilities. In our case, that's with PG&E to bring electricity to customers in a CCA service territory. In our particular case, we'll talk a bit more about this too, but we're serving the unincorporated area of Yolo County, along with the cities of Davis, Woodland, and Winters.
Mitch, were you
Yep.
intending to share with us right now?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I see it. Sorry, I didn't have my window open. Go ahead.
I can see
Sorry
it.
to interrupt.
Yeah,
You might want to go to presenter
see the
mode.
slides.
No, it's
Okay.
fine, Mitch.
All right, very good. So basically how, for those of you who aren't familiar with the model, the way that the CCA works is shown in this, in the graphic at the bottom. The local agency, the Community Choice Aggregation Program, they source the electricity. It comes from what that particular program prioritizes and how they choose to source that energy. So essentially, this is the generation side of the business. In our particular case, PG&E maintains the delivery side of it, so the distribution and transmission side of the business. They maintain that, and they also do the billing on our behalf. So we pay PG&E to do the billing. And on the customer side, it's pretty seamless. You get the same bill. There's a different line item under the generation portion of the bill. But other than that, unless you engage more deeply, that's about what the exposure is for the customers. In California, it's been a pretty remarkable couple of years as these programs have formed in many counties. Right now, there are 23 active community choice aggregation programs. 12 of those are in PG&E service territory. And I think we're above 50% of the total load of PG&E is served now by CCA program. There's More than 11 million customers are served by these 23 agencies. So again, a big proportion of the state is served by CCAs. Many other communities, counties are considering there. You can see on the map, in the dark green shows where the active programs are. We're kind of right in the middle of that gold star. Others are sort of considering at this point in time or are further along in the process. So there's quite a bit of activity that's happened over the past few years. The first program was started by Marin in 2010. So over the past 4 to 5 years, including us, there were a number of programs that were served. We have also formed a statewide association called CalCCA, which is a representative group, both on the regulatory and legislative arenas, representing the interests of CCAs. It's a very collaborative group. I sit on the board of directors for CalCCA as one of the directors of the CCA programs. And they've done some pretty remarkable things, again, in a short period of time. It's a really good organization that's been formed up around this. So moving on now to Valley Clean Energy itself. Won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide either. Obviously, we're a community choice aggregation program. We're created by and for the local communities. It's a not-for-profit joint powers authority. We do provide some competition in the marketplace that we believe benefits customers. And we provide more renewables in our portfolio at the same cost as PG&E on the generation side of the bill. And very simply put, VCE's mission is to provide clean electricity, product choice, greenhouse gas emission reductions, all with local control and competitive prices. And we can delve into those aspects a little bit more as we kind of go through the slide deck. As I mentioned, we have 4 current members, Yolo County, City of Davis, Woodland, and City of Winters. Winters just added in, began service in 2021, January of 2021, last month. And the leadership of VCE is made up of 2 members from each of the member jurisdictions. So we have a board of directors of 8 local electeds. Some familiar faces here. This is a picture that's a little bit old, but it gives you a sense of it's folks who have local decision-making authority are on the leadership team of Valley Clean Energy. In addition, as we mentioned, Valley Clean Energy is supported by a 12-member community advisory committee, of which Christine is the chair, and it's made up of 3 residents from each of the 4 member jurisdictions. So they become a really important sounding board and discussion arena for Valley Clean Energy as we take on different policy questions around the energy sector here locally. And Christine can talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. And just a quick sort of profile of Valley Clean Energy. So again, launched in 2018 after a couple of years of doing feasibility analysis. We were launched with Yolo County and the City of Davis originally. Woodland joined shortly after, but before the June 2018 launch. As I mentioned, Winters joined and we began serving Winters customers in January. There's about 65,000 customer accounts. So it's, if you do the math, it's somewhere, about 150,000 folks if you count the number of households that we're serving, and about 750 gigawatt hour of annual load. So we're on the smaller side of CCA programs, but we do have some that are similar in size to us. Like for example, the program up in Humboldt, Redwood Coast Energy Authority, is about the same size as us, as well as the program that serves Placer County, though they have just added another county as well, so they'll be a little bit larger than us. terms of the profile, so in 2019, these are drawn from some of the census numbers that we have access to at this point. The median household income in our service territory is about 57,000. In California, the average is 67,000. So it does show that we're serving, our service territory does have some challenges in terms of income equality. The poverty rate currently stands at about 19%. We do have an agricultural load that's relatively robust when compared to other CCA programs because we are a Central Valley based program. So not surprising there, but we also have one of the highest net energy metering or rooftop solar penetration rates of any of the CCA programs. So that creates potentially a bit different focus for VCE. We do have about a 90% customer participation rate, so about 10% of our customer base has opted out. That's about where we're relatively even with other CCA programs around the state. We're better than some, maybe a little bit higher opt-out rate than some others. And then one other quick note here is that each of the three largest member entities are about 1/3 of the load. So it's a fairly balanced load. With winters coming on, they have about 5% of our annual load. So we're taking that into consideration and blending that into how we think about the communities that we serve. As I mentioned, we're the only Central Valley-based program. It does mean that we have a unique load profile, meaning that we have summer peaks that some of the other programs don't necessarily experience, air conditioning loads primarily. And we do have a rural and suburban mix that's relatively unique as well. We are advising other Central Valley programs that are interested in launching and joining CCAs, though for reasons we'll get into here in a bit, it is a challenging landscape to launch one of these programs at this point in time. And again, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but just a couple of quick examples of some of the projects and programs that VCE is engaged in is EV charging. We have an EV charging grant through SACOG that I know members of Cool Davis are well aware of, and our member agencies are, it's a partnership project with our member agencies. We do have large scale solar plus storage projects, which I'll show here in a slide or two. And we also did run a local request for offers to fill out some of our portfolio with local renewable and storage projects. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a slide also. So this is, these next couple of slides are just a couple of kind of common questions that we get. So one of the things that, one of the policy directives from our board is to match PG&E's rates. So this is a slide that we use in many presentations that show that in fact our standard green or our default rate, which is shown here in this first column. And again, this is just a sample, of course, but our standard green does match on a price basis with PG&E, though we outpace them on the renewable calculation by a fair amount. We also have in the third column an ultra green option, and it ends up being, in this particular case, about $8.20 more per month for 100% renewable product that we would provide. But some of the key elements in this too, looking at this first column, so you can notice that on the delivery charge, so again, that's the lines and the wires and the meters and all that kind of stuff. Our customers, VCE customers, pay the same amount as a PG&E, what we call bundled customer, in every case. On the generation side, we actually are able to source our portfolio is about 25% cheaper than PG&E's because they have legacy contracts. So we actually source for a fair amount less than PG&E. However, what we call additional PG&E fees here, this is mostly what we call the power charge and difference adjustment, or PCIA. This is the above market costs that PG&E has for its customers, which our customers pay as they leave. But even with the generation charges and the additional fees, we do match PG&E. And this is our most current power content label. This is the one that's published. It's from 2019, so it's always about a year, a little over a year behind. But this is information that we submit to the California Energy Commission. But this is the basic power content that we have at this point. So we have 45% renewable, and those are short-term renewable contracts at this point. We have about 31% large hydro, and then 23% unspecified. So together, the renewable and the large hydro do add up to 75% carbon free. In comparison, PG&E, again, a lower renewable percentage, a little bit lower on the hydro, and then also a nuclear component that we do not have. And our board of directors made a policy decision not to include nuclear or other fossil fuels besides natural gas in our portfolio. Now, the unspecified, at sort of the worst case, it's 23% natural gas. But the reason why it's called unspecified is that it's unclear which type of resource is providing that. So there is some renewable that's mixed into that unspecified amount, but we don't claim any of that on our power content label. So try to keep it relatively simple for our customers. So moving on here, just to give a sense also in the activity level, I mentioned that we're in short-term contracts in our current portfolio. The objective has been from the very beginning to move towards longer-term contracts for renewables and actually cause the creation of new resources to be built. What this slide shows is the activity that VCE has been engaged in. It does take a couple of years lead time to be able to put out the RFP, select potential counterparties or developers of these projects, move through negotiation process, and then get them actually built. And what this shows is that we do have resources that we have contracted for in different parts of the state. And we'll just sort of quickly go down the list. So number one is a 50 megawatt solar project in Kings County, scheduled to come online in this fall. So that's the first large scale project. That is a 15-year contract. And what that helps us do is two things. One is it provides stability because it is a longer term contract, but actually it ends up being a cheaper price for VCE customers because it is a long-term contract as opposed to buying renewables on a short-term basis. So that's the first one. Number two was 2 and 3 came out of our local request for offers. We focused in on Yolo County, though we allowed for proposals from adjacent counties as well. Both of these projects ended up being proposed and selected are located here in Yolo County. Number 2 is scheduled to come online this fall, and it's a small project out near Winters, 3 megawatts solar, 3 megawatt battery energy storage. And number 3 is closer to Esparto. It's a 20 megawatt solar project with 6.5 megawatt battery energy storage. Again, those are scheduled to come online in 21 and 22. A couple of other interesting things. We also did a joint project with Redwood Coast Energy Authority, the CCA. It's a standalone battery, so it helps balance the grid, provide resource adequacy. And our share of that is about 2.5 megawatts for a lithium ion battery storage facility that's located in Sutter County, fairly close to VCE service territory. And then number 5, we contracted with Leapfrog, which is a an aggregator for demand response. And we have a 7 megawatt long-term 10-year contract with them for demand response, and it's system-wide, so it's not focused on VCE service territory. They go out and they find clients who are willing to modify their energy scheduling in order to be able to lock in that demand response. That's very important going forward as more renewables, intermittent renewables come online. We experienced some of that, the value of that this past summer during the heat event, with demand response being an important component, though a relatively small one, but VCE felt like it was important to lock in some of the, and show how that type of a resource can be applied and folded into a portfolio, and the benefits that come along with that. And then the last one is a large project in Southern California in San Bernardino County, a 90 megawatt solar facility with a 75 megawatt battery energy storage system scheduled to come online in 2023. Moving on, just talking a little bit about the community investment that VCE is engaged in. Clearly, this is one of the reasons why the member jurisdictions wanted to create a local energy program in the first place, is what value, direct and indirect, CCA could bring back to the service territory. So the largest sort of program that we've become engaged in so far is serving as a co-lead on about a $3 million SACOG grant to fund public EV charging infrastructure in Yolo County. So we've worked with the city of Davis, we've worked with, along with Woodland, the county, to identify, they've each identified sort of what their priority projects are, and the $2.9 million is allocated out to each of the jurisdictions, and want to acknowledge the work that Carrie did with the city of Davis and helping both in being sort of a co-lead on that, and the city of Davis's willingness to serve as a fiduciary agent through this process to help get the money out. VCE is working directly with the city of Winters to help them access the funding and to be able to put in some fast chargers in the downtown Winters area, as well as potentially rehab some of their existing level 2 chargers. So it's a good example of the types of things that a local CCA can become engaged in. We already talked a little bit about the local renewable energy storage. We do note one of our first contracts was with the Yolo County Flood and Water Conservation District for the Indian Valley Reservoir. It was a contract that was coming out of PG&E was not going to renew the contract with the district, so we stepped in. It was one of the first contracts that we negotiated, and they continue to provide some power for us from Indian Valley. And also on local programs funding, the board of directors, the Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors, has established a local fund, a local funding program funding account, and they are committed to. They've made a commitment to fund that account in the order of, at a minimum, 1% of revenues from net revenues from Valley Clean Energy. Currently, that amount stands at about $225,000. And the Valley Clean Energy Board, the Community Advisory Committee, is currently working with staff to develop a programs plan that will look to implement some of the key programs that are identified through that process, and tap into that local program funding. In addition, we did as part of the negotiations for those long-term power contracts that I showed you on the last slide, we did negotiate for local investment by our counterparties in those contracts. The total right now in that fund is close to $300,000 for local workforce development, as well as community investment around sustainability issues. And we think that those are really important sources of funding to help advance Valley Clean Energy's goals, and also to demonstrate the power of CCAs for helping advance local investment. Some of the key considerations that are facing Valley Clean Energy currently, and just categorize these as sort of needs and opportunities. There is the energy sector is in a very dynamic period. That's sort of an understatement, and I got a little chuckle out of Christine because she knows sort of firsthand, sitting on the Community Advisory Committee, having gone through some of the challenges that we have since we've launched, including last summer, some of the power outages and some of the wildfire issues that did touch some of our service territory, as well as things that are happening across the country, including in Texas right now. It's just a very dynamic period. And so this is an area where it creates challenges, but also opportunities. One of the real values that we believe that a CCA program provides is the flexibility and the ability for local decision-making to influence energy policy that actually impacts, the customers that are living here in Yolo County. And so it does, the model itself does provide for that opportunity. But clearly, some of the challenges exist within climate. Clearly, that's what Cool Davis has been organized around, and the discussion tonight is kind of focused on that, but also the costs that go along with being able to try to accomplish this. So this is some of the, referencing back to some of the things that Michael was saying, is that there's programs and funding coming from outside, potentially outside, but we do need to be mindful as an organization of the costs, and because the way our model is structured, and that our customers can opt out and leave and go back to PG&E, we do need to keep a close eye on what the customer costs are. Some of the other needs and opportunities here. So we believe it's important to grow the local voice and diversified voice in the energy discussion and planning. One of the ways that the VCE board has done that, has made a commitment, and in our strategic plan, which we'll talk about here in a second, is to specifically address the environmental justice issues that exist within our service territory and more broadly. So the VCE board did adopt an environmental justice policy, and just to be clear, environmental justice, the way it's defined by the EPA, it does include social equity as well. So it's more of a catch-all kind of phrase that we use, but it is front and center for VCE as we move into more uncertain times from a climate and energy standpoint. That those are issues that have to be recognized, addressed, and folded into the decision-making that happens at the local level. So as I mentioned, the CCAs do offer a more nimble approach, more customer-oriented, and a problem-solving kind of local jurisdiction kind of thinking or mindset that comes into the energy sector, where it didn't really exist before, in that there is a disconnect between an investor-owned utility who may not have the interests of local communities as their first priority. So just quickly to mention a few of the challenges that are in front of us on the regulatory side, autonomy and the ability to do rate setting and procure the resources as we think are best fit our service territory. Those are under constant pressure from the regulatory perspective, primarily from the California Public Utilities Commission, who are more used to regulating three investor-owned utilities, not public entities who have a separate board of directors and have autonomy. So there's some friction there and some challenges, but we're working with our CalCCA partners to try to address those and try to orient the CPUC a little bit more that this is a little bit different setting. We do have the PCIA, or the above market costs. As I mentioned, we can procure for about 25% less than PG&E, but that's then returned back to PG&E in the form of the PCIA. Also, our resource adequacy and capacity market design, meaning the power that we need to make sure is available on the grid at any particular time to meet our peaks, is becoming more and more challenging. On the fiscal side, presents challenges as well. So this above market cost recovery, the PCIA, since our launch in mid-2018, it's gone up, it's doubled, which presents a real fiscal challenge to not just VCE, but all CCAs. And actually, since the first CCA was formed, that PCIA has actually gone up over 800%. On resource adequacy, again, this is the power that essentially it's a kind of an insurance policy to make sure that there's power available. That's also gone up, more than doubled since our launch, gone from roughly $7.4 million in our budget to over $18 million. So we're trying to figure out creative ways to navigate those cost increases and to minimize them to the degree that we can. And then also, of course, this is all in the context of an ongoing pandemic, which created additional challenges for obviously, I'm not just saying for VCE, but for everyone in general. So those are some of the sort of key challenges that are in front of us. And I'm going to transition now we'll talk about how VCE is looking at these issues and how we're going to address some of these challenges and opportunities through our strategic plan. And it is designed to really kind of take us through the next 3 years. So, and I know I've been talking here fairly for probably more time than I had intended on that background, but I think it's important just to sort of set the context. In this next slide, I'm going to let Christine take over the majority of this, and then we'll talk specifically we'll run quickly through a couple of slides around the strategic plan itself. So the strategic plan development, so it was a 9-month development and review process, which led to unanimous approval by the board of directors in November of 2020. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Christine for a few minutes here. She can describe the CAC's perspective.
Sure. So one of the next things here that Mitch has on the slide is that in the whole overall strategic plan development, 2 of the things that were incorporated and are important are both our vision statement and our mission statement. And at the time that we were first starting to work on the strategic plan, the board, the CAC, and the staff, we were aware of a variety of recent actions that had been taken by other entities in the same areas, other entities like utilities or CCAs. And the first one was that SMUD in July of 2020 adopted a climate emergency resolution. And at the same time that they adopted that, the board adopted a resolution to commit to working towards carbon neutrality by 2030. In that same time frame, as many of you know who are on this call because you were involved in that, in September of 2020, the Yolo County Board of Supervisors approved a climate emergency resolution. And in that resolution, it states that the county goal for their footprint is to have a carbon negative or climate positive footprint by 2030. And at the same time, from Peninsula Clean Energy, which is a CCA in the Bay Area, They have our 2020 to 2025 strategic plan, and they have a rather aggressive goal of having 100% renewable energy on an hour-by-hour basis by 2025. So when we were starting to do this whole process, those were things that were out there that we were aware of. So staff worked with both the Community Advisory Committee, which is, as Mitch says, we often weigh in on and sometimes go into things more deeply than the board on specific things. He worked with the CAC and he worked with the VCA board to get input and feedback. So I'm going to just go into very briefly the overall approach of the CCA to the process here on the strategic plan. It was definitely a collaborative and iterative process with the board of directors and the staff. And two things I want to emphasize is the whole process for starting the strategic plan was initiated in the beginning of 2020 by the board of directors. And that's a very good thing because what we have here now is a good document to guide us. And the main work, the vast majority of the work on the strategic plan was done by staff and a consultant. So one of the first things that happened when we were getting ready to do the strategic plan is the consultant, along with staff, put together a survey on various priorities and goals. It was filled out both by the board of directors and the CAC. And once they had the results back from that, they put together sort of the average board and the average CAC response. There were a lot of similarities in the priorities, but there were some differences. And one of them was that the board tended to value the finance a little higher, and the CAC members tended to value the energy goals a little bit higher. Once we knew the results of sort of all the surveys, the CAC did what it does on a lot of things. It had some rather in-depth discussion sessions. And in this case, we focused on the main plan areas that we wanted to have in the strategic plan. And one of the critical things that we did is when we first started out, there was like 13 plan areas, and we focused that down to 6 main plan areas. And overall in doing this, we talked about that there were some similarities and differences. We had an iterative process, staff, board of directors, and the CAC on melding our priorities. So that led to what I think is a good document. And now Mitch is going to take it back over and go briefly through what is in our strategic plan.
Yeah, and Chris, I know that we're running up against time here. I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I do want to hit a couple of the highlights of the strategic plan and show where the topic areas that are covered. So Christine, I think, described it fairly, that the board did focus in on some of the rates and fiscal stability pieces of the recommended plan, and they are featured prominently because, again, we need to have a strong fiscal foundation to be able to execute around some of the other objectives that are identified. The board did, through the plan, adopt a policy to study and try to achieve carbon neutrality in our portfolio by 2030, with an eye towards, as Christine mentioned, 100% carbon-free hour by hour by 2030. And again, that's important when we talk about this concept of resource adequacy, where we're meeting our peaks. So there's a coincident amount of procurement of renewable power to meet those peaks, and not just an average over the course of a month or a year. So it's basically net versus absolute carbon-free. The plan did identify the development of roadmaps for decarbonization, including our portfolio, but also programs, resilience and reliability in the VCE service territory. What could VCE do to help advance those two really important aspects? And then also to expand local community expertise and input in the energy sector decision-making process. Those were all really important points that were identified in the plan itself. Additionally, as we talked about, a more focused engagement with historically, and I think importantly, they identified emerging disadvantaged communities and local businesses. So we're trying to be mindful that it's not a static situation with regard to disadvantaged communities. something that we want to try to keep an eye on and understand, as well as more engagement with our local businesses and the agricultural sector as well. And then lastly, just one of the fiscal kind of measures is to try to achieve an investment grade rating by I think it was by 2025. And what that does is it, again, is a demonstration of the fiscal soundness of the organization, but it also then helps us negotiate more effectively with our counterparties on power contracts, because the perceived risk is lower than for an organization that has that type of setting. So again, just very quickly, these are the topic areas that are in the plan. Talk about first section is focuses on financial strength. Second, on procurement and power supply. How are we going to accomplish the goals in that sector? How are we on the third section, customers and community? Because we are a community and customer oriented organization and program, how do we advance those objectives? D, the decarbonization and grid innovation section touches on some of the objectives we have there. And again, that's the development of some of those roadmaps. A focus on statewide issues, making sure that we're tracking regulatory and legislative affairs closely. And then we needed to sort of take care of our own, keep our own house in order as well, and talked about how we can build a good workplace and or an organization to serve the communities going forward. So the next set of slides here are all, we sort of pulled those out. They're the goals and objectives in these different topic areas, but I think I'd prefer to open it up for questions. I've been talking a lot. Christine did a very good job of keeping her comments short, but we can delve back into those if people have specific questions about the strategic plan. So, but again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and we're more than happy to take questions. And I'm amazed everybody's still here. I just after talking that long and not seeing everybody. And
I think I see a hand in the air with Scott.
Yeah. Hi, Mitch. I appreciate your presentation and hearing from VCE. It's a pleasure. What I would like to ask of you and Christine is just to know, because of my work with YOLO Climate Emergency Coalition, we're very much about marginalized communities, frontline communities. Who is the person who handles the engagement with what I'll call climate justice project work? Because we have a lot going on right now.
Yeah, great question, Scott. Thanks. So Rebecca Boyles, who's actually on the line here with us. Thanks, Rebecca, for joining. She's our point person. She's our director of customer care and programs. And so she is heading up our efforts on that issue. And again, I will not overstate where we're at right now, and that we're developing the policy and understanding how that policy impacts both our organizational structure as well as our activities. But we're happy to connect with you and the work that the organization is doing. It's great.
And the other thing I wanted to add, Scott, is that if you ever feel you'd like to make a 2-minute comment at a CAC meeting, this applies to everybody that's on the call. If you have something that you're interested in, something that you think VCEA should be considering, at the CAC, we always have public comment for before we get into the agenda. You're welcome to come and make a comment. And we might not be able to say anything back, but we always pay attention to what people say.
Was there anyone else with a question?
So Johan and Michael had questions in the chat, Chris.
Michael?
Hey, this is Michael. Thank you for that. So I did put a question in earlier, Mitch, on when you were talking about where the renewables are located. I've been doing some work on identifying capacity constraints on our grid for putting in renewables, and storage is going to help with that. There's some other technologies that are going to come online to help with that. We're seeing it a lot in those areas that have installed a lot of renewables, like the San Joaquin. Wondering if you're running into the same issues here and you're having siting constraints based on limited capacity on switching stations or substations or that type of thing. It's a statewide problem. I'm just curious about if it's impacting YOLO as bad as some of the other areas of the state.
Yeah, so it is a consideration for us as we're doing contracting. Typically, it comes through the regulatory process. The PUC and CAISO, California Independent System Operator, does have provides guidelines and rules for the capacity factor of a particular facility, and a lot of that is based on the constraint to be able to manage the grid in that particular location. But they're focused more right now on the types of renewables that are being installed. So, for example, as more and more solar gets installed, it provides energy through the middle part of the day most effectively, and obviously drops off at night. And so what we would call the capacity factor, or what that resource adequacy value is, back to a procurement agency like ours, it drops over time. And that's part of the regulatory uncertainty that we're wrestling with, because as we sign up a long-term contract, if, say, for example, half of that resource adequacy value that was signed with a particular value that was assigned to it when we signed the contract, and if half of that goes away over time, then that can be a real problem from a financial standpoint for an agency. But the constraints are real, and one of the things that the battery storage does allow us to do is it does allow us to regulate and schedule that power into the grid when it's needed most, and as the capacity allows. So, but that's one of the other reasons why we're actually geographically diversifying as well, so we don't get caught in a situation where we have piled in all of our long-term contracts in one portion of the San Joaquin Valley, for example. When a constraint occurs or some type of outage occurs, then we're not impacted fully. That's one of the reasons why we really like our Yolo County projects here as well, because it's close to the load, it's serving that load, and it does address that diversification kind of question. But it's a real and complex issue that, again, I think it's important for local jurisdictions to start to come up to speed on these issues and start understanding how the electricity system works. And that, by and large, is happening through CCAs. It's not the investor-owned utilities or the Public Utilities Commission or the CAISO going out and saying, this is how things really work. This is why, this is how we may be able to solve this issue. For example, doing some of the demand response. That's part of the solution set, that at the local level, you can be more nimble. You can have more localized decision-making that can actually benefit the entire grid. So that's one of the things that we're excited about. It's a issue, but it's also an opportunity kind of going forward. So yeah, good question.
So
I
Mitch,
see Richard Bodie has a hand up.
Oh, well, that was
Yeah,
Dick Bourne,
so-
actually. Maybe Richard did as well. Go ahead.
Oh, go
Richard.
ahead. You want to go first, Dick?
Well, I think you were recognized first, Richard, so you go.
Okay. Mitch, I got some basic questions for you. It was, you talked about the battery storage systems themselves. What exactly is it? Is that power you draw from stored energy, or is it a backup in case you lose your power? What is that?
Yeah, another real good question. In our particular case, we're doing things at utility scale. So we're talking megawatts in size. And so basically kind of big lithium ion battery packs that are kind of stacked together. Think about these things in like a shipping container size, and multiples of those. And so what they do is they, depending on how they're located, if they're co-located with a solar project, which is what our preference is, they would take, when there's excess capacity being produced by that facility, we're putting that into the battery, right? And as that solar comes off in the early evening and the net peak of energy use increases, then we start to use that battery to help regulate and not prevent, but minimize the amount of gas-fired power plants that come online to be able to meet that early evening peak when everybody gets home and starts turning on things. And so that's typically how the battery is used. And part of it, but if it's a standalone battery storage, then it's taking power off the grid and storing when there's excess and storing it until it's needed, typically, in the evenings, so that we can balance out some of these things. And then they can become very important too when there are peaks, like for example, during the heat wave, even during the middle of the day, where the capacity of the grid is being outpaced by the production or the ability to import. So they can become quite effective in that situation. Now, again, I don't want to overstate, battery storage is still relatively small compared to the overall need of the grid, but it can be a very effective tool to help alleviate some of those issues. And one of the things I pointed out before too, I talked about the long-term contracts. The cost of those long-term contracts in the renewable sector is cheaper than doing the year-to-year, the short-term contracts. The same is true in battery storage and in this demand response. When we're out on the market, having to purchase those resource adequacy contracts, they're quite expensive and are getting more expensive, as I showed in one of the slides. These battery storage components can be cost effective also in comparison to those short-term contracts. So there's a fiscal aspect to these as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
Explain one more thing too. Carbon neutral versus carbon free.
So carbon, probably not a whole lot of difference functionally speaking, but absolute carbon free for us means that 24-hour a day we have renewables powering our meeting our demand. Okay. Net carbon neutral is an average over a period of time, but not necessarily meeting those peaks. So sometimes you're producing more than you need, sometimes you're producing less, but it's on net, it's 100%.
So Richard, if people have solar on their homes, that's kind of a good example. That like in the middle of the day, you're maybe making more electricity than you're using, and that's going to the grid. And then in the evening, you're taking the dirty power from the grid. But overall, maybe at the end of the year, like for me, at the end of the year, I got extra 19 whatever dollars. I was, beyond a titch over carbon neutral. So the carbon neutrality, like Mitch says, there's still some fossil fuel in your whole overall usage, even though you've overproduced to balance it out. In the carbon-free hour by hour, you're not responsible for any fossil fuel on the grid. Much harder to achieve.
And one other real quick comment, Richard, that's why we believe EVs are so critically important to this grid question. Being able to take energy when it's available, being able to distribute it when it's not. That's the vehicle to grid aspect and why it's so important for organizations like yours. We really love what you're doing.
So I'm going to jump in here. Chris says her controls are not cooperating with her to get the meeting wrapped up. I wanted to give Johan a chance. He's had several questions. Can you pick one of your questions, Johan, for Mitch?
It's so difficult to take one of my questions. I would love to bring it down to one question, but I'm not able to do so.
But we need to finish. The meeting is intended to end at 6. I don't know if folks need to get going, but try to make it quick.
I have submitted 5 ideas to a Dutch sustainability website, and 3 of them are presented over there. And I would love to discuss them, and would love to have negative comments in particular, because that I can prepare myself in case they come back to me. So,
okay. Is there a question right now you want to pose, Johan, in particular?
I would love. No, I would love to answer questions about my questions. Then basically my statement is words cannot solve any problem.
Okay.
In global warming, unless that word is one number, and then we can start talking about better or worse, more or less, right and wrong, and then we can focus our life. I have not been able to focus my life all my life. The last idea that I have in my mind to, for example, cover the dairy ponds in California to trap the methane at very low cost. It makes no sense to compare this idea with existing methodologies, not having one focus. And I could have done so 10 years ago. And I've not achieved anything in my life.
So usually in this meeting, it is our goal to have some time at the end for more questions and discussion, but unfortunately that's not occurring. I want to give Dick one chance to, it looks like Dick has one question, and then I think we'll be ready to wrap up.
Well, you know, I don't think there's going to be time to, thanks Leslie, I don't think there's going to be time to answer this, but it really has to do with my concern about the greatest challenge with a 2030 carbon neutral hour by hour goal being the trend that we're going to be seeing more and more toward all electric heating, and the probability that, you know, a long foggy windless spell puts stresses on the VCE system that I'm not sure are modeled well enough. And so Mitch, you could give a quick answer to that, or we could talk offline.
Yeah, my answer to that is we'll have a quick, we'll have a discussion offline, Dick. That's a fair question, and that's why right now we're developing essentially a roadmap and assessing whether or not that's possible. So that's the work that's in front of VCE at this point in time to try to understand what those limitations are and how we might be able to mitigate those to work towards that goal.
Thank you, Mitch. So as Chris mentioned, there's still opportunity for topics and presenters for next quarter's meeting, it sounds like. So let Chris know if there's something that you think would be addressed here, could be addressed here at this meeting. And thank you to our speakers, Mitch Sears and Michael McCormick and Christine Shoemaker. Anybody have any final thoughts? Questions, concerns? Scott? No. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie. Thanks for hosting.
Sure.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, Dick. And happy to really anytime, you know, sit down and have a discussion, because it is actually one of the primary questions, you know, that's going to emerge.
Well, I'll look forward to that, Mitch. Take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you, too. Hey, Chris, thanks again for hosting. Sorry for have droned on for as long as I did. I wish we'd left more time for questions.
It's okay.